Salim, we're recording this on Sunday, 4 days after January 6th and the event of the March on the Capitol building. And now that the fog of war has somewhat cleared, even though there's still a lot of things left in the air to question, I'd like your thoughts on that one particular day and that one particular event. And that is, of course, Trump's speech where he asked people to peacefully walk to the Capitol building and lend support to the weak Republicans because they need it, the rhinos. The letting in of protesters into the Capitol building by Capitol Police, some actually fought. And the subsequent speech by Trump where he said that it's now, please go home and act peacefully. And to sum that up, the media and the Congress's interpretation of all of that as being incitement to riot and therefore grounds for impeachment. Your thoughts?
Yes, Robert. My thoughts are, both of us, we sat and watched the events unfold on Wednesday, January the 6th, and have been reflecting upon it. My immediate thoughts are what I'm reminded from an anecdote, a famous historical anecdote of the late Premier of China, Premier Zhou Enlai, arriving in Paris, the first Chinese leader coming to Paris after the revolution, or coming to the West after the revolution. And as he came down his plane and went into a press conference, one of the questions that was asked of Zhou Enlai was, Mr. Prime Minister, you are in Paris. What are your thoughts about the French Revolution? And Zhou Enlai paused, and then after a moment, he responded, I believe it is too early to say what it means.
Well, 200 years after the fact, yeah.
200 years after the fact.
I can see why you would bring that little anecdote up, because it is rather early to reflect on such tumultuous events in Washington, but let's do our best.
Yeah, I just wanted to put it in context. Both of us are, dealing with issues where the smoke has not completely cleared, and an event of a nature that I think we have not witnessed of the like. I mean, comparisons will be made. I mean, it is not for the first time that we saw pictures of people walking into the Capitol, and then what happened, the mayhem that happened, and who was responsible for it, and the breaking down of some windows and doors, and there was a casualty of a young woman who got shot, who herself was a veteran officer from the United States Air Force, a Trump supporter. So some of the fog has lifted, but the point is that the Capitol has been, in recent times, has been under attack or has been, surrounded. I mean, 2 years ago, when the Kavanaugh was nominated by President Trump for the Supreme Court, all mayhem broke through. People were marching in on the Capitol, broke into the Capitol, stormed the Supreme Court precincts. So these have happened, and we can go all the way back to the Vietnam War. And when the Democrats and the communists are engaged in activities of such nature in contemporary America, as early or as late as the summer of 2020, when America was burning with Black Lives Matter and Antifa, then the call from the Democratic leadership, including Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, and others, Chuck Schumer, was this is the First Amendment right and needs to be respected. And, cheering them on. But when it comes to conservatives or Republicans in this nature, when it comes into the people who have been defined by Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party as the deplorables, then, this is a mob, this is an insurrection, this is a criminality, this is not a First Amendment right that needs to be protected. But we can talk about that. As I step back, I mean, what the point I was driving at is, yes, the smoke has somewhat cleared, and we can look back on the day, January the 6th, and the events that have happened, and can share some thoughts. And then where is America headed? I was trying to say that January 6th will become, in some sense, one of the most defining dates in American history in some ways. In some ways, I would say that it is on this day the American constitutional order, Republican constitutional order, was fatally wounded. Whether it has died or not, time will tell. And if the Republican constitutional order is to be resurrected, to be reborn, as was the Union that was fatally wounded and in fact died when the southern states, the Confederacy states, fired their cannons on Fort Sumter in April of 1861, just a few weeks after Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated in March of 1861. The bombing, the cannon fire on Fort Sumter was a fatal shot that brought the end to the Union, and it needed the bloody civil war that was unleashed to be finally, brought to an end with the victory of the Union Army over the Confederate Army that led to President Lincoln in his famous speech at Gettysburg, 1863, and in his second inaugural address, talk about the rebirth of a nation, the rebirth of freedom, the rebirth of union. In other words, in 1861, the Union had been fatally wounded and died. So I see parallels over here. I see parallels that January 6th was a terrible blow to the American Republican order. And the debate has started. It started right then and there of who is responsible and who is to be blamed for it. And we can see that, 4 days later, we can see that President Trump has been deplatformed. He is the president of the United States. He is the president until his first term ends on the noon hour of January the 20th, 2021. So he is the president.
The disrespect by social media to ban him like that is unprecedented. And of course, it feeds into the mainstream media and Congress narrative that he incited people to riot because they are preventing him from defending himself in the court of public opinion, for reiterating his peaceful intentions, which were quite obvious on the day. And they even took down the video of him saying, peacefully disperse, which, by the way, is a requirement for the Insurrection Act to ask people, who are rebelling to disperse. So he can actually sign that Insurrection Act if he hasn't already. And that would be the saving grace, I think, for America. Because if this is left to stand, if Biden's stealing of the election is left to stand, in my estimation, the United States is dead. It is a fatal blow, his fraudulent election, because now the Democrats own the mechanism by which governments change. And you can see that they will never, ever allow another patriot kind of government, Republican, or likewise, Democrat, to be elected ever again. So the experiment of the United States would be dead if Trump lets this stand. Do you agree?
I agree with you. We are in agreement on that. Uh, if Biden has been declared the president-elect, and under the circumstances, I want to spend a little moment on that in a moment. It was done at a dead of night, so to speak, without anybody present. So Biden as the president-elect, Kamala Harris as the vice president-elect, if they are then inaugurated on January the 20th, and become the 46th president of the United States, then January 6th will be the day that the Republican constitutional order, the United States, 245 years, was not only fatally wounded, it died. And then what happens at the noon hour of January 20th, 2021, with Biden taking the oath of office, he will be taking the oath of office of a Potemkin republic, which is now, in a sense, an power allied to and an axis of and a dependency of the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Republic of China. That will it be. But it will be seen by many Americans, 100 million and plus, 80 million who voted for President Trump. And the people who came to Washington was part of that 80 million who voted for President Trump, plus the numbers have grown now, I'm sure. As per the Rasmussen poll that was done a couple of days after January the 6th, the president's support was on an upward swing. Over 50% now, I think, is in support of President Trump and stand with him, and that will increase. So the country is not only divided and split down the middle in terms of where the public is, but in effect, it will be a new order, completely new order. And the signs of that new order we can see. It will be an order in which the Bill of Rights will no longer protect the individual American. America is based upon the concept of the individual right. That's First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, and so on and so forth. Well, here it is. 4 days later, after January the 6th, we can see that President Trump has been deprived of his First Amendment rights. The entire big tech, the entire alphabet soup media, and the legacy media, the New York Times, Washington Post, and all of that, they just made President Trump a non-person from their point of view. I mean, the only source by which we can still read the other perspective is through the internet, and even those a platform might be closed. I mean, I understand Firefox is already Mozilla trying to get rid of any reference to people who are going to use the Firefox browser to go to those sites that are, we might now define or call them as the patriot sites in America. So that is the scenario that is being played out. There is the other thing on the question of removing President Trump from office. There have been reports that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, was immediately after they had voted for Biden to be, they had gave Biden to be the president-elect. She was in touch with the Joint Chief of Staff, General Milley, to take away the nuclear code from President Trump.
Some have said that act of asking the Speaker of the House, asking the military to take away that tool from Trump is in itself a traitorous act.
Exactly, that's what I was coming to. So that happened in the public. It didn't happen behind any scene. It's on the record, I believe. So ironically, it has come back the deep state, the swamp, is now claiming to be in power and is trying to direct the issues of the United States. And that tells us it is, in a sense, it is an internal conflict, a civil war has broken out. And that broke out on January the 6th. The president, the word is out that he has signed the Insurrection Act. And if he has signed the Insurrection Act, then, he is now basically proclaimed a martial law government. And as the chief executive, he will be moving all of the assets of the American forces, U.S. Marshal and the military, the Air Force, the Space Command, the Marine, into operation to deal with what he sees as the foreign and the domestic threat to the Republic. That there will possibly be arrests. I hope violence doesn't break out, but there could be violence because if on the other side, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and others have their police and others that they're directing resist the president, then it could lead to violence. Violence broke out once the guns were fired on Fort Sumter in April of 1861. President Lincoln, brought down martial law, the Insurrection Act, and he sent the U.S. Marshal and the men in uniform to arrest those legislators that he was concerned about who would possibly join. This is in the state of Maryland. Washington, the capital is in Maryland in that sense. It shared boundaries with Maryland and Virginia. Virginia became the Confederacy state, but Maryland, whether Maryland would end up joining the Confederacy state. And Lincoln sent his marshals to arrest the legislatures so that, they wouldn't vote or wouldn't be able to vote to join the Confederacy state. So that would be within the purview and the authority of the president. And I imagine we will be hearing more about this as reports come in, but not through the mainstream media, because they have declared war on the president because in effect, they have taken away his First Amendment right. The entire speech of the president was about the stolen election. 3 hours later, 4 hours later, the entire media, global media, Canadian media, everyone is talking about the mob, the insurrection, and the president instigated it. The issue of stolen election is gone. The narrative was shifted, and it has been completely shifted. Nobody's talking about the stolen election. Nobody's talking about that about 130 plus million people voted on November 3rd. 75 million plus for Trump. Take it away from 130 million plus. That's about 50 million plus that has remained. But the claim is that Biden got 80 million plus vote. So where does the 30 million plus vote comes from?
Okay, let's leave it there, Salim, and let's see what tomorrow brings. Thank you.